I drove out to the state forest in late October, choosing a spot I had camped near once years before. The place was far from towns and far from main roads. The trees were tall and tight together, mostly pine with some dead hardwood mixed in. The ground was covered in old needles and wet leaves. I wanted quiet, cold air, and a few days alone. I parked at a small dirt pull-off that looked barely used. There were no other vehicles. The silence felt heavy, the kind that presses on your ears when there is no wind and no birds. I packed my gear and walked in on a narrow trail that faded in and out. It was not marked well, but I remembered enough to trust myself. I carried a small tent, food, water filter, sleeping bag, and a few tools. I did not plan on hiking deep, just far enough to feel alone. The forest smelled damp and old. Every step made a soft crunch. I kept walking until the road noise was gone, until even the idea of other people felt distant. I found a small clearing near a shallow creek. The water moved slow and dark, reflecting the trees like broken glass. The ground was uneven but dry enough. I set my tent carefully, checking for roots and rocks. I made sure nothing sharp was under it. I worked slowly, taking my time, enjoying the routine. The light was already turning gray, even though it was still early afternoon. Clouds hung low and thick. Once the tent was up, I gathered wood. Most of it was deadfall, snapped branches and old logs that crumbled when I kicked them. I stacked them in piles, separating the dry from the damp. I kept noticing how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, just the creek and my own breathing. I told myself it was normal for the season. As night came, the temperature dropped fast. I made a small fire and cooked a simple meal. The flames barely crackled. The smoke went straight up, like the air was frozen. I ate slowly, staring into the woods. The dark between the trees felt thick, like it had weight. I could not shake the feeling that the forest was holding its breath. After eating, I cleaned up and stored my food away from the tent. I hung it as best I could, though the trees were not perfect for it. I checked the area one more time, scanning with my headlamp. Nothing moved. No eyes reflected back. I felt uneasy anyway. I crawled into the tent early. The cold pressed in from the ground. I lay there listening to the creek and the wind brushing the tops of the trees. At some point, I noticed another sound. It was faint, almost easy to miss. It sounded like footsteps, slow and uneven, far off but real. I froze and listened harder. The sound stopped. I told myself it was a deer or something small moving through brush. I lay awake longer than I wanted. Every small noise felt loud. Branches popped as the temperature dropped. Something moved through leaves once, close enough that I could hear the scrape. Again it stopped. No sudden rush, no clear direction. Just movement, then nothing. I did not sleep much that night. Morning came dull and gray. Fog hung low over the creek, rolling slow and heavy. Everything felt damp. I crawled out stiff and cold. The fire pit was exactly how I left it. No tracks near the tent that I could see, but the ground was hard and covered in leaves, not good for showing prints. I made breakfast and drank coffee, trying to calm myself. The daylight helped, but not enough. The forest still felt wrong. I decided to hike around the area to get a better sense of things. I followed the creek downstream for a while, stepping carefully over rocks and mud. About half a mile down, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was a boot print in the mud near the water. It was not old. The edges were sharp. It was not mine. I knew my own boots well, and this print was larger with a different tread. I stood there staring at it, my breath slow and shallow. I looked around, searching for more prints. There were a few more, faint but there, leading away from the creek into thick brush. They did not follow the trail. They cut straight into the trees. I felt exposed standing there. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes moving. On the walk back to camp, I noticed small changes I had not seen before. A branch bent in a way that looked fresh. A patch of leaves disturbed near a tree. Nothing clear, nothing solid, but enough to make my skin crawl. Someone else had been out there, and they were not camping like I was. Back at camp, I packed some of my gear tighter. I considered leaving right then. Pride and stubbornness kept me there. I told myself it could have been a hunter passing through, someone who moved on. Still, I kept my headlamp close, even in daylight. The afternoon dragged. The clouds thickened and the light faded early again. I gathered more wood, staying close to camp. Every sound made me turn. I felt watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way, like eyes on my back when I was not looking. That night, the sounds came back. Footsteps again, closer this time. Slow, careful steps, stopping when I moved. I held my breath, listening. The steps circled wide, never coming too close, never leaving completely. The pattern went on for hours. I did not sleep at all. At one point, I smelled smoke that was not mine. It was faint but real. It drifted past the tent and then faded. My fire was out. I knew it was not me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I sat there gripping my knife, feeling small and trapped. Just before dawn, the sounds stopped. The forest went dead silent again. When light finally crept in, I felt hollow and tired. I waited until full daylight before leaving the tent. Near the edge of my camp, I found a small pile of stones stacked neatly. They had not been there before. I stood there staring at them, my mind racing. Someone had been close, very close, close enough to touch my tent while I slept. I did not waste time after that. I broke camp fast, stuffing gear without care. I did not eat. I did not filter more water. I just packed and left. I kept looking over my shoulder as I walked out, half expecting to see someone step out from behind a tree. The walk back felt longer than it should have. The trail seemed different, less clear. I moved fast but careful, not wanting to trip. Every snapping twig sounded like pursuit. My legs burned. When I finally saw the dirt road, relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. My car was still there, untouched. I threw my pack in the trunk and drove away without stopping. I did not slow down until I reached pavement. Later, after I was home, warm and safe, the weight of it all settled in. I reported what I saw to the local ranger station. They told me there had been reports of someone living rough in the forest, avoiding contact, watching camps at night. They said no one had been hurt yet, but people had left shaken, like me. I never went back to that area. The memory still sits heavy in my chest. The worst part was not fear of attack. It was the quiet patience of whoever was out there, watching, waiting, moving only when I could not see. The forest did not feel wild out there, felt occupied. And I knew, without doubt, that if I had stayed one more night, the ending might have been very different. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet. That was the main reason. I had been tired for months in a way sleep did not fix. Work, traffic, noise, phones, people everywhere. Always something pulling at my attention. I wanted a few days where nothing was expected of me. No messages, no schedules, just trees, dirt, water, and time moving at its own speed. I chose a spot deep in a national forest that I had never been to before. It was legal to camp there, far from the marked campgrounds. I checked maps, weather, and rules. I packed carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, extra food, water filter, headlamp, spare batteries, first aid kit, knife, bear spray even though bears were rare there, and a small handgun that I kept locked and unloaded in my pack. I did not expect to need it. It was just something that made me feel safer. The drive took most of the day. The road slowly turned from smooth highway to cracked pavement, then gravel. Cell service faded until it disappeared completely. The forest closed in on both sides, tall trees packed tightly together. The light changed under the canopy. Everything felt cooler and darker even though it was still early afternoon. I parked at a small pull-off near an old service road that was no longer maintained. The road looked like it hadn't been used in years. Grass grew through the center. Fallen branches lay across it. I locked my car, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The hike in was longer than I expected. The map said 3 miles, but it felt longer under the weight of my gear. The forest was quiet in a way that felt heavy, like sound was being absorbed. I heard birds now and then, wind moving through leaves, my own breathing, and the steady crunch of boots on dirt and pine needles. After about 2 hours, I found a small clearing near a creek. The water moved slowly, shallow and clear. The ground was flat enough for a tent. There were no signs of recent camps, no fire rings, no trash. That felt good. It felt untouched. I set up camp slowly, taking my time. I pitched the tent, staked it down, laid out my sleeping pad and bag. I filtered water from the creek and filled my bottles. I ate a simple meal while sitting on a log. The sun dropped lower, and shadows stretched between the trees. As evening came, the forest changed. The light thinned, the air cooled, sounds became sharper. Every rustle stood out. I reminded myself this was normal. Animals moved more at dusk. Wind picked up and died down in waves. I started a small fire, careful to keep it controlled. I watched the flames and let my mind slow down. For a while, I felt exactly what I had come for. Calm, stillness, space inside my head. That feeling did not last. The first thing that bothered me was how quiet it became. Not peaceful quiet, but empty quiet. The birds stopped. Insects went silent. Even the creek seemed louder by contrast, its steady movement sounding like something was wrong with it. I stood up and listened. I scanned the trees around the clearing. Nothing moved. No shapes shifted. No eyes reflected light. I told myself it was nothing. Forests did this sometimes. Patterns changed. Still, I felt watched. I went back to the fire and sat down, but I kept looking into the dark. The fire only lit a small circle. Beyond that, everything blended together. Tree trunks looked like they were leaning closer when I stared too long. I decided to turn in early. I put out the fire completely, scattering dirt and making sure no embers remained. I zipped myself into the tent and lay on my back, headlamp off, eyes open. Sleep did not come easily. I heard something late that night that snapped me fully awake. Not an animal sound, not wind. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, careful, leaves compressing under weight, then releasing. They were not close, but they were not far either. I held my breath and listened. The steps stopped. Silence stretched. Then they started again, circling, not approaching directly, but moving around the clearing. I could tell by how the sound shifted. I did not move. I did not reach for anything. I stayed completely still, hoping whoever or whatever it was would pass by. After a long time, the footsteps faded. I waited even longer before letting myself breathe normally. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into a shallow, broken sleep. Morning came gray and cold. I woke with stiff muscles and a dull headache. For a moment, I wondered if the sounds had been a dream. Then I saw the ground outside my tent. Footprints. They were human. Boot prints. Fresh. They circled my campsite. I felt a heavy drop in my stomach. Someone had been there. Someone had walked around my tent while I slept. I packed quickly. I did not eat. I did not linger. I kept scanning the trees as I worked. I told myself to stay calm, but my hands shook. I decided to move camp rather than leave immediately. Part of me thought it was safer not to walk straight back the way I came. If someone was out there, they might expect that. I chose to follow the creek upstream, deeper into the forest, hoping to find another spot before nightfall. It felt wrong to go farther in, but panic does not always choose the smartest option. The hike was harder this time. The terrain grew uneven. Rocks and fallen logs slowed me down. The forest felt tighter, more closed in. The light struggled to reach the ground. I stopped often to listen. Several times I thought I heard movement behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing. I could not tell if my fear was sharpening my senses or dulling them. By afternoon, I found another clearing, smaller than the first. I set up camp again, though my instincts screamed against it. I needed rest. I needed daylight to move safely. That night was worse. I heard footsteps again, closer this time. I smelled smoke that was not mine. I heard branches snap under deliberate weight. I stayed inside the tent, heart pounding, every muscle tight. At some point, something brushed the side of the tent. Light pressure, then gone. I did not sleep at all. When dawn came, I did not wait. I packed everything and left immediately. I decided to abandon the creek and cut cross-country toward the old service road. The map showed it running roughly east. I headed that way, checking my compass often. Hours passed. The forest felt endless. My legs burned. My mouth went dry. Several times I was sure I heard someone behind me. I never saw anyone, but the feeling never left. Near evening, I found the road. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. I followed it fast, not caring about noise or caution anymore. When I finally saw my car, I almost cried. I unlocked it, threw my pack inside, and got in. Only then did I notice something carved into the dirt near my driver's door. An arrow, pointing into the forest. I drove away as fast as the road allowed. I did not stop until I reached a town with lights and people and noise. I reported everything to the ranger station the next day. They took notes. They nodded. They said they would look into it. Nothing ever came of it. I still think about those footprints, about the careful steps in the dark, about the arrow in the dirt. I do not camp alone anymore, and I do not go back to places where silence feels like it is waiting for something, because sometimes it is. I drove alone for most of a day to get to the place where I planned to camp. It was a wide stretch of public land far from towns, stores, or cell service. The road was paved at first, then cracked, then broken, and finally turned into hard dirt. Dust followed my truck like a cloud that never let go. The land around me felt empty in a way that made sound feel loud. Even the engine noise felt like it did not belong there. I chose this place because it was remote and quiet. I wanted to be alone for a few days, to clear my head and sleep outside. I had camped many times before, and I trusted myself to be careful. I brought enough water, food, and fuel. I told one person roughly where I would be, though not the exact spot. I thought that was enough. The campsite itself was not an official site. It was just a flat area near a dry riverbed with old tire marks and a circle of blackened stones from previous fires. The land was open, with low bushes, dry grass, and scattered rocks. There were hills in the distance that blocked the view of any road. Once I parked and shut off the engine, the silence settled fast. It felt heavy, like something pressing down. I stepped out of the truck and stretched. The air was dry and warm, and the sun was still high. I walked around the area to check for signs of animals or anything unsafe. I saw old footprints, both human and animal, but nothing fresh. The ground was hard and cracked, holding marks for a long time. That made it hard to judge how recent anything was. I set up my tent slowly, taking my time. I laid out my sleeping pad and bag, then placed my food in a sealed container inside the truck. I knew better than to leave food out, even in a dry place like this. I set up a small cooking area a short distance from the tent. Everything felt normal. The land was quiet, but that was expected. As the afternoon passed, the light shifted. Shadows grew longer and the heat eased a little. I cooked a simple meal and ate while standing, looking around the open land. I noticed how far sound carried. Even small movements felt loud. When I dropped a utensil, the clink against the rock seemed to echo. After eating, I cleaned up and put everything away. I did not start a fire. I did not feel like it, and I did not want to draw attention. As the sun dipped lower, the sky turned orange and red, then faded into pale gray. The temperature dropped faster than I expected. I sat on a folding chair and watched the light fade. The quiet felt deeper at night, like the land was holding its breath. I could hear my own breathing clearly. Every small sound stood out. Wind moving through dry grass sounded like footsteps if I did not focus. When darkness fully settled, I turned on my headlamp and checked the area again. I walked a short circle around my camp, scanning the ground. That was when I noticed something that made me pause. Near the edge of the dry riverbed, I saw a set of footprints that looked more defined than the others. They were not crisp, but they stood out. They went in a direction that crossed close to my campsite. I told myself they were old. The ground preserved prints for a long time. Still, I followed them with my light for a short distance. They led away toward the hills, then faded into harder ground. I stopped there and went back to my camp. I zipped myself into the tent and lay down, listening. The wind picked up slightly. My tent fabric moved gently. I tried to relax. I reminded myself that fear grows easily in places like this, where the mind has too much space. I lay there for a long time without sleeping. The ground felt cold under me, even through the pad. The silence was not complete. There were small sounds, distant and close. A rock shifting, a small animal moving. Each sound made me tense, then relax again. At some point, I heard something that did not fit. It was a sound of movement that felt heavy, slow, and deliberate. It came from far away at first, then closer. I turned off my headlamp and listened. My heart beat faster. The sound stopped. The silence returned. I waited, counting my breaths. Nothing else happened. After a long while, I convinced myself it was an animal passing through. I had camped around animals before. They made noise. Eventually, I fell into a shallow sleep. I woke suddenly, not knowing why. My body felt tight, like it had been pulled from a dream by instinct. I listened. The air felt different, heavier. I heard a sound again, closer now. It was not random. It was controlled. Something was moving carefully. I stayed still. I did not reach for my light. I focused on listening. The sound circled slowly, keeping distance from the tent. There was a pause, then another sound, like fabric brushing lightly against something. My stomach tightened. Animals did not move like that. They did not stop and start with purpose. I thought about my truck, parked a short distance away. I thought about how visible it must be in the open land. The sound moved away, then stopped again. I heard nothing for a long time. I stayed frozen, afraid that any movement would give away my position. My thoughts raced, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. After what felt like an hour, but was probably less, the sound faded. I did not sleep again that night. I watched the tent walls slowly lighten as dawn approached. When the sun finally rose, I felt weak with relief. In daylight, the land looked harmless again. I stepped out of the tent and stretched, trying to shake off the fear. I walked around the campsite, scanning the ground carefully. Near the edge of my tent, I saw new footprints. They were clearer than the ones I saw the night before. They were close enough that I could see the pattern on the sole. They circled the tent once, then led toward my truck. My mouth went dry. I followed them slowly. They went right up to the driver's side door, then back away, heading toward the riverbed. I stood there for a long time, staring at the marks. There was no damage to the truck. Nothing was missing. That almost made it worse. Someone had been there, close enough to touch my door, and chose not to. I packed up my camp quickly. I did not eat. I did not sit down. I folded the tent, rolled the sleeping bag, and loaded everything into the truck with shaking hands. I kept looking up, scanning the land, expecting to see someone watching. Before leaving, I took a long look at the footprints again. They were not random. They showed slow movement, careful steps. Whoever made them had taken time. I drove away faster than I should have on the dirt road, dust rising thick behind me. I did not slow down until I reached pavement and saw another vehicle in the distance. Only then did my shoulders drop slightly. I did not stop until I reached a small town hours later. I parked near a gas station and sat in the truck, hands still tight on the wheel. My body felt drained, like I had run for miles. I never went back to that place. I learned something important from that night. The land itself was not the scariest part. The scariest part was knowing that someone else had been there, silent and unseen, close enough to touch, and chose to remain hidden. That knowledge stayed with me long after the fear faded, and it changed how I camped forever. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet, not because I wanted fear. I had been working nonstop for months, barely sleeping, barely thinking about anything except deadlines and screens. I wanted to disappear for a few days into a place where my phone had no signal and nothing expected anything from me. I chose a remote national forest that allowed dispersed camping, meaning no official campsites, no facilities, no people unless they wanted to be there just as badly as I did. I told myself that was the point. I told myself I was prepared. I drove for hours on a cracked two-lane road that slowly narrowed and rose into the hills. The trees changed from scattered and short to dense and tall. Pines crowded the road so closely that their shadows covered the asphalt even in the afternoon. The air felt different when I stepped out of the car to check my map, cooler and heavier, with the smell of sap and damp dirt. There was no sound except wind moving high up in the branches and the ticking of my engine cooling down. No birds, no insects, nothing else. I turned onto a dirt road marked only by a faded wooden sign with numbers burned into it decades ago. The road was rough and uneven, forcing me to crawl forward in first gear. Rocks scraped the bottom of my car. Deep ruts showed where rainwater had carved the ground. I passed old tire tracks going both directions, some fresh, some almost gone. I tried not to think about who had made them. After nearly an hour on that road, I found a small clearing set back from a dry creek bed. It looked flat enough, hidden enough, and far enough from the road that no one would stumble onto me by accident. Tall trees ringed the clearing like a wall. Their trunks were thick and dark, and their tops disappeared into a canopy that blocked most of the sky. It was late afternoon, but the light already felt like early evening. I parked, shut off the engine, and listened. Again, there was almost nothing. Just wind far above me and the faint creak of trees rubbing against each other. The silence felt pressed tight, like something holding its breath. I unloaded my gear slowly. Tent, sleeping bag, food bin, water, stove, flashlight, spare batteries, knife. I had done this enough times that the routine felt automatic. I chose a spot slightly uphill from the creek bed, cleared away sticks and rocks, and set up my tent. The ground was dry on the surface but soft underneath, like it had soaked up water recently. My boots left deep prints. While I worked, I noticed something odd about the clearing. There were no animal tracks, no deer prints, no small paw marks, no disturbed leaves except where I walked. It was as if nothing passed through this space anymore. I told myself animals avoid open areas during the day. I told myself it meant nothing. By the time the tent was up and my gear was inside, the light had shifted again. The shadows were longer, darker. The air had cooled fast. I checked the time and realized sunset was less than an hour away. I gathered firewood, snapping dead branches off fallen trees, stacking them neatly. The wood was dry, lighter than it should have been, almost brittle. I built a small fire ring with stones I found near the creek bed and got a fire going. The flames felt comforting, normal. The crackle broke the silence. Smoke rose straight up, barely moving, which told me the air was still down here even if the wind was moving above the trees. I cooked a simple meal and ate slowly, watching the forest edge. As the light faded, the trees seemed to lean inward, their shadows merging into a solid dark wall. Beyond the reach of the firelight, I couldn't see anything at all. It wasn't gradual darkness. It was like stepping into a tunnel. That was when I first felt watched. There was no sound, no movement, just a pressure like my awareness had been tugged in one direction. I kept glancing toward the same cluster of trees on the far side of the clearing. Every time I looked, there was nothing there, just trunks and shadow. Still, the feeling didn't go away. I told myself it was normal. Being alone at night messes with your head. Your senses look for patterns, for threats. I focused on practical things. I cleaned up my food, sealed it in containers, hung it from a tree branch a good distance away. I doused the fire down to low embers and climbed into my tent. Inside, the small space felt safe at first. I zipped the door, laid out my sleeping bag, and turned off my headlamp. Darkness pressed in immediately. The fabric walls glowed faintly from moonlight filtering through the canopy, but I couldn't see shapes, only vague shadows moving when the wind stirred the trees. I lay there listening. At first, it was just forest noise. Wind, occasional branch movement. Then I noticed what wasn't there. Still no insects, no night birds, no distant animal calls. The forest felt empty in a way I hadn't experienced before. I checked my watch. Less than an hour had passed since I lay down. Felt much longer. That was when I heard footsteps. They were faint at first, irregular, like someone stepping carefully on uneven ground. Not heavy, not light, just deliberate. They came from the direction of the creek bed. I froze, every muscle tight. I held my breath without realizing it. The steps stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before. My ears rang with it. I strained to hear anything else, any clue. Minutes passed. I started to convince myself it had been an animal. A deer, maybe, moving slowly. Then the steps started again, closer this time. They circled the clearing, staying just beyond the edge of the fire ring's dark outline. I could tell because the sound changed with direction. Whoever or whatever it was didn't rush, took its time. I stayed still, my hand wrapped around the knife I kept beside me. My heart hammered so hard I worried it could be heard through the tent walls. The steps stopped directly in front of my tent. I could see a shadow blocking the faint moonlight. It was tall, upright, not an animal on four legs. The shape shifted slightly, like someone adjusting their stance. Nothing touched the tent. Nothing spoke. It just stood there. Seconds stretched into minutes. My legs cramped from tension. Sweat gathered along my back despite the cold. I stared at the fabric wall, expecting it to move, to be pushed inward. Eventually, the shadow stepped away. The footsteps retreated slowly, not running, not sneaking, just walking. I lay there long after the sounds faded, shaking, trying to control my breathing. My mind raced through explanations. Another camper messing with me. Someone lost. Someone curious. None of them felt right. No one announces themselves like that in the dark, not out here. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me flinch. Branch snapping, wind gusts, distant thuds I couldn't identify. Each time I started to drift, I jolted awake, convinced something was inches away from the tent. When morning finally came, it felt unreal. Pale light seeped through the fabric, slowly revealing the inside of the tent. I unzipped the door and stepped out cautiously. The clearing looked normal, empty, peaceful even. Birds chirped now, suddenly loud after the night's silence. The creek bed showed no obvious signs of disturbance. No footprints that I could see, though the ground was hard and covered with needles. I packed up quickly. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I just needed to get some sleep. I decided to move deeper into the forest, farther from the road. I thought maybe another dispersed camper had wandered too close and moved on. The hike in was harder than I expected. The terrain grew steeper, the forest denser. Fallen trees blocked the path, forcing me to detour often. The light dimmed as the canopy thickened. Even during midday, it felt like late afternoon. After several hours, I found another spot near a narrow stream. This one felt more enclosed, surrounded by rock outcrops and thick brush. It would be hard to approach quietly. That made me feel safer. I set up camp again, this time paying extra attention to my surroundings. I scanned for signs of recent activity. Broken branches, trash, footprints. I found none. The ground here was rocky, uneven, less forgiving to footsteps. As the day passed, the uneasy feeling returned. It wasn't constant, but it never fully left. I tried to distract myself by fishing in the stream, by organizing my gear, by writing in a notebook. Still, my eyes kept drifting to the tree line. That night, I built a bigger fire and kept it going longer. The flames cast sharp shadows on the rocks, making the area feel smaller, contained. I stayed up late, listening, watching. Nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion won. I crawled into my tent, leaving the fire to die down naturally. I slept deeper this time, pulled under by sheer fatigue. I woke to the sound of breathing. It was close, just outside the tent. Slow, steady, not rushed, not strained, just calm breathing. I sat up so fast my head spun. The sound stopped immediately. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on, aiming at the tent wall. The light revealed nothing but fabric. I held it steady, listening. A few seconds passed. Then something pressed against the tent. Not hard, not aggressive, just enough to make the fabric bow inward slightly, like a hand or a shoulder leaning gently. I screamed without sound, my throat locking up. I kicked out instinctively, my foot hitting the spot where the pressure was. The tent snapped back into shape. The thing outside moved away. I heard footsteps again, this time faster, retreating into the brush. Branches cracked, leaves rustled. Then silence. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my essentials, slashed open the tent door, and ran. I didn't care about gear, about food, about anything except distance. I ran blindly through the trees, tripping, slipping, scraping my arms and legs. I kept going until my lungs burned and my vision blurred. I didn't stop until I reached the dirt road. My car was exactly where I left it. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. When the engine finally turned over, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove without stopping, without looking back. I didn't slow down until I hit pavement. I reported nothing. I told no one. I went home, showered, tried to sleep. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I remember the way the footsteps moved, the way the breathing sounded. Calm, patient, like it knew I was temporary there, and it wasn't. I never went back to that forest. I never camped alone again, and I learned something important that trip. The woods don't need ghosts to be dangerous. Sometimes the scariest thing out there is just another human who doesn't want to be seen, and who knows those trees far better than you ever will. I went camping alone because I needed space and quiet after months of feeling worn down by work and life. I picked a random spot on a public land map, far from towns and popular trails, a place most people ignored because it was hard to reach. The road leading there was narrow and broken, with deep ruts and loose gravel. Trees leaned close on both sides, scraping the sides of my truck. My phone lost signal about 40 minutes before I reached the spot, and I already knew there would be no service at all once I parked. I liked that idea at the time. I told myself it would force me to relax and reset. The area was deep forest mixed with rocky ground and old logging clearings that had grown back unevenly. The air smelled wet and heavy, like soil and pine needles. It was late afternoon when I finally stopped the truck near a small clearing beside a slow creek. The water moved quietly, dark and cold-looking, with moss-covered rocks lining the edges. The trees were tall and thick, blocking out a lot of light even though the sun was still high. Everything felt still, not peaceful exactly, just quiet in a way that felt serious. I unloaded my gear slowly, taking my time. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, and a basic first aid kit. I noticed right away that the ground had signs of past use. Old fire rings filled with ash, flattened areas where tents had once stood, and a few broken branches that looked cut rather than snapped. That didn't bother me much at first. It was public land, after all. Other people had camped here before. As I set up my tent, I paid attention to the small details around me. The creek had shallow areas where animals had crossed, leaving tracks pressed into the mud. I saw deer tracks, maybe elk, and smaller prints I couldn't clearly identify. Some tracks overlapped, going in different directions, like this spot was used often by wildlife. I told myself that was normal near water. By the time the tent was up, the light had started to change. The sun dropped lower, and the forest shifted in color. Shadows stretched out longer, and the air cooled quickly. I cooked a simple meal and ate sitting on a flat rock, listening to the creek and the occasional rustle of leaves. There were no voices, no distant road noise, nothing mechanical. Just natural sounds layered on top of each other. As night came, the forest changed again. Insects grew louder, then slowly quieter as the temperature dropped. I heard animals moving far away, branches snapping softly, leaves shifting. None of it felt strange on its own. I had camped many times before and knew forests never go completely silent. Still, I felt more alert than usual. I kept scanning the trees with my eyes, even though there was nothing specific to look at. I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. The inside smelled like nylon and dust. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark fabric ceiling, listening. Time passed slowly. The sounds outside continued, steady and uneven. At some point, I noticed something that didn't fit well with the rest. Footsteps. They were faint at first, almost blended into the natural noises. Slow, uneven steps on dry leaves and dirt. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or something smaller. I stayed still, listening carefully. The steps stopped, then started again, closer this time. I could hear the weight behind them, heavier than a small animal. Too slow and deliberate for something like a deer. My heart rate picked up. I held my breath without realizing it. The steps circled part of the clearing, then moved away slightly. I waited for the sound to fade, but it didn't fully go away. It just stayed there, shifting, pausing, moving again. Eventually, the sound stopped completely. I lay there for a long time after that, tense and awake. No more steps, just the forest again. I convinced myself I had overreacted. After all, I had chosen a remote area. Someone else could have wandered through earlier and left. Or maybe it really was an animal. Sleep came in short pieces. I would drift off, then wake suddenly, heart racing, listening again. Nothing else happened that night, at least nothing I could clearly identify. When morning finally came, I felt tired but relieved. Daylight made everything look more normal. The clearing was the same as before, quiet and empty. I stepped out of the tent and stretched, breathing in the cool morning air. The creek reflected pale light through the trees. Birds moved through branches overhead. I felt a little foolish for how nervous I had been. While making breakfast, I noticed something near the edge of the clearing. The ground there looked disturbed, like someone had walked back and forth. I walked closer and saw clear boot prints. They weren't mine. The tread pattern was different, and the size looked larger. The prints went around the clearing, stopping near my tent, then continuing toward the trees. I stood there staring at them for a long time. My stomach tightened. These were not old prints. The edges were sharp, pressed deep into the damp soil. Whoever made them had been here recently, probably last night. I scanned the tree lines slowly. There was no movement, no sounds, just trees and shadows. I told myself it could have been another camper passing through, but that explanation didn't sit well. There were no other vehicles anywhere nearby, and no trail leading directly through the clearing. This place wasn't on a common route. I considered packing up and leaving right then, but part of me didn't want to admit fear. I also told myself daylight was safer, and if someone had been here, they were gone now. I decided to stay another day, but I stayed alert. I spent the morning exploring nearby, staying within sight of the camp. I followed the creek upstream a bit, noticing more signs of human presence the farther I went. Old trash buried shallow in the dirt, a rusted can, scraps of plastic. None of it recent, but enough to show that people came through here sometimes. Around midday, I heard a sound that made me stop cold. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking under weight, followed by another, came from deeper in the woods, not far away. I stood still, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Not rushed, not panicked. Steady. I moved slowly back toward my camp, keeping trees between me and the direction of the sound. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched settled heavy in my chest. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to think clearly. Maybe it was just someone hiking through, I thought. Still, I stayed close to my gear after that. The rest of the day passed without anything obvious happening, but the tension never left. Every sound pulled my attention. I kept noticing small things that felt off. A branch that seemed freshly snapped near my tent. A rock moved from where I was sure it hadn't been before. I couldn't prove any of it meant something, but together it wore me down. As evening came again, I debated leaving before dark. I checked my fuel, my supplies, and my truck. Everything was fine. I could leave, I told myself, but I hesitated. The road back was rough, and night driving there wouldn't be easy. I decided to stay one more night, telling myself I would leave early in the morning no matter what. I cooked dinner quickly and ate without enjoying it. I cleaned up carefully, making sure no food scraps were left out. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. As darkness settled in, the forest seemed heavier than the night before. The air felt thicker, the shadows deeper. Inside the tent, I lay awake again, listening. Hours passed. Then, the footsteps returned. This time, there was no doubt. Slow, clear steps on leaves and dirt, moving steadily around the clearing. I could hear breathing, faint but real. The steps stopped near my tent. I could tell exactly where the person was standing, close enough that I could hear the fabric of the tent shift slightly as air moved. I stayed completely still. My body felt frozen, every muscle tight. My mind raced through possibilities. I had no weapon, just a small knife meant for food. I didn't reach for it. I was afraid even that movement would give me away. The person outside didn't touch the tent. They just stood there for a long time. I could hear small movements, weight shifting from one foot to the other. Then the steps moved away, slow and deliberate, circling again. At some point, I realized something that made everything worse. The steps were careful. Whoever this was knew exactly where they were going. They didn't trip or stumble. They weren't just wandering. Eventually, the sounds faded into the forest. I didn't sleep at all after that. I waited for dawn, counting breaths, listening for any sign of return. When the sky finally began to lighten, I moved quickly. I packed everything as quietly and fast as I could, hands shaking the whole time. I didn't bother eating. I just loaded the truck and got in. Before starting the engine, I looked around one last time. Near where my tent had been, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A set of boot prints stood facing where my head had been inside the tent. Right there, close enough that the person could have touched me through the fabric. I didn't wait any longer. I started the truck and drove out, faster than I should have on that road, not caring about the damage or the noise. I didn't stop until I reached a paved road and saw other cars. I reported the incident later, but nothing ever came of it. No one else reported anything from that area. There were no cameras, no witnesses. I still think about that trip often. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. Whoever was out there never revealed themselves fully. They never spoke. They never touched the tent. They just watched, close enough to remind me how exposed I really was. I don't camp alone in remote places anymore. The forest didn't do anything wrong. It was just there, the same as always. But someone else was there too, and I never found out why. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet and space and time away from everything. I picked a random place on the map, a national forest that was far from towns and main roads. I did not choose it for beauty or views. I chose it because it looked empty. That was important to me at the time. I wanted to feel small and alone in a big place. I drove for hours on highways and then smaller roads, and then roads that were barely roads at all. The pavement turned into cracked asphalt, then gravel, then dirt. The trees got thicker and closer together. The sky became harder to see because the branches leaned in from both sides. My phone lost signal long before I reached the spot I had marked. I expected that. I liked that part. It made the trip feel real. When I finally parked, it was late afternoon. The sun was low but still bright, cutting through the trees in long straight lines. The air smelled like pine and dry dirt and old leaves. There was no official campsite, just a wide clearing near a creek, with signs that other people had used it before. The ground was flattened in places, and there were old fire rings made of blackened stones. No trash, no footprints that looked fresh. Everything felt still and unused, like the place had been waiting. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. When the engine noise stopped, the silence felt heavy. Not empty, just heavy. I could hear the creek running somewhere nearby. I could hear insects, somewhere far off. A bird called once and then stopped. I felt calm. I also felt a little exposed, like I had stepped into a room without walls. I got out of the car and stretched. My legs felt stiff from the drive. I opened the trunk and started unloading my gear slowly, taking my time. Tent, sleeping bag, food box, water jugs, stove, headlamp, extra batteries, first aid kit. I laid everything out in neat piles. I always do that. It makes me feel in control. The ground was uneven, so I walked around the clearing to find the flattest spot. I chose a place not too close to the creek but close enough to hear the water. The trees around the spot were tall and straight with thick trunks. The canopy above was high, letting in enough light. Felt like a good place. I set up the tent carefully, checking each stake in line. I made sure it was tight and secure. I cleared away small rocks and sticks from underneath. I did not rush. I did everything the way I always do, the way I have done many times before. Nothing felt wrong at that point. Nothing stood out. After the tent was up, I gathered some dead wood from around the clearing. Dry branches, fallen limbs, things that snapped cleanly. I stacked them near the fire ring. I checked the area again for signs of recent use. I did not see any. The fire ring looked old. The ash inside was gray and packed down, like it had been there for a long time. As the sun lowered more, the light changed. Shadows stretched and deepened. The forest looked different, more layered, more complex. The sounds changed too. Daytime insects faded and others took their place. The creek sounded louder, or maybe I just noticed it more. I started a small fire. I did it carefully, building it slow. When the flames caught, the warmth felt good on my face. I sat on a log and watched the fire burn. I ate a simple meal from a metal bowl. Nothing fancy, just enough to fill my stomach. I remember thinking how normal everything felt. How calm. I remember thinking that this was exactly what I needed. No noise, no people, just me and the forest and the routine of camping. As it got darker, I cleaned up and stored my food in a sealed container, then locked it in the car. I did not want animals coming into camp. I washed my hands with a little water and wiped them on my pants. I stood there for a moment and listened. That was when I first noticed something that did not fit. It was subtle, easy to miss. The forest noise had changed again, but not in the normal way. The insects were quieter. Not silent, just quieter. The creek still ran, steady and constant. But the small sounds, the background sounds, felt thinner, like something had pressed down on them. I told myself it was nothing. Forests change sounds all the time. Animals move, wind shifts, temperature drops. I had been camping enough to know that. I added more wood to the fire and sat back down. The fire popped and cracked. Sparks floated up and disappeared into the dark. The smell of smoke mixed with pine. As full darkness settled in, the world shrank to the circle of firelight. Beyond that, everything was black. I could see tree trunks at the edge of the light, but nothing beyond them. Just a wall of darkness. I put on my headlamp and walked a short distance around camp, checking things one last time. The beam of light cut through the dark, bouncing off leaves and bark. Everything looked normal. No movement, no eyes reflecting back, no sounds that stood out. When I got back to the fire, I noticed the quiet again. It was still there, not total silence, but a dullness, like the forest was holding its breath. I told myself I was tired. Long drive, new place. My mind was playing tricks on me. I put out the fire carefully, making sure no embers remained. I poured water over it and stirred the ash until it was cold. Then I zipped up the tent and got inside. Inside the tent, the darkness was deeper. I turned off my headlamp and lay on my back, staring up at the faint outline of the tent ceiling. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the creek. The ground felt firm but not uncomfortable. For a while, everything was fine. I drifted in and out of sleep. I felt relaxed, safe enough. Then I woke up. I did not know what time it was. It was fully dark. My watch face glowed faintly when I checked it. A little after midnight. I woke up because something felt off. Not because of a sound. Not because of a dream. Just a feeling, like I was being watched. I lay still and listened. The quiet was heavier now. The insects were almost gone. The creek still ran, but it sounded far away, like it was behind a wall. I held my breath for a moment and listened harder. That was when I heard it. A sound from somewhere beyond the edge of camp. A slow, deliberate noise. Not footsteps exactly. More like weight shifting. Something moving carefully. I stayed still. I told myself it was an animal. Deer, elk, maybe a bear, though bears usually make more noise. They are not careful. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then it started again, closer this time. Still slow, still careful. My heart started to beat harder. I could feel it in my chest. I did not move. I did not turn on my light. I listened. The sound circled the camp, staying just outside the reach of where the fire had been. I could tell because the sound moved left to right, then paused, then moved again. I told myself not to panic. Animals circle camps. They sniff. They investigate. That is normal. But something about the rhythm felt wrong. Too steady, too controlled. I could hear my own breathing getting louder. I forced myself to slow it down. The sound stopped again. Time stretched. Seconds felt long. Then I heard something else. A soft, dull thump, like something being set down gently. I froze. Another thump. Closer. On the other side of the tent now. I could hear fabric shift slightly as something brushed against the outer wall of the tent. Very lightly, not enough to shake it, just enough to let me know it was there. My mind raced. I thought about animals. I thought about how animals usually behave. I thought about how they sniff, paw, push. They do not usually touch tents gently. I reached slowly for my headlamp and turned it on inside the tent. The sudden light made my eyes hurt. I listened. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I stayed like that for a long time, light on, heart pounding. Eventually, I told myself that whatever it was had moved on, that the light scared it away. I did not sleep much after that. I drifted in shallow, uneasy half-sleep. Every small sound snapped me awake. At some point, exhaustion took over and I slept deeper. When I woke again, the sky was gray. Morning light filtered through the tent. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Daylight has a way of doing that. I got out of the tent and stretched. The clearing looked the same as before. Calm, quiet. The creek sparkled in the morning light. Then I saw the marks on the ground. Around the edge of camp, just beyond where the firelight would have reached, the dirt was disturbed. Not tracks exactly, more like scuffed areas. Drag marks, impressions that did not look like hooves or paws. I walked slowly around, looking closer. The ground was dry, but the marks were clear enough to see. Long, uneven depressions. Some spots where leaves had been pushed aside. I felt a tightness in my chest. I checked the tent. On one side, near where I had heard the brushing sound, the fabric was dirty, smeared with dark streaks, like mud or something similar. The marks were at about waist height. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. I told myself someone could have walked through. A hiker, a local, but there were no footprints, no clear shoe prints. And why would someone circle my camp in the dark and touch my tent? I packed up slowly, very slowly. I did not eat breakfast. I did not make coffee. I just packed. As I loaded the car, I kept scanning the tree line. I felt exposed in a way I had not the day before. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt crowded with things I could not see. Before leaving, I walked a short distance down a faint trail that led away from the clearing. I do not know why I did it. Curiosity, maybe, or a need to understand. Not far from camp, I found more marks. Clearer this time. Drag marks leading off into thicker trees. And alongside them, footprints. They were not animal prints. They were not shoe prints either. They were bare footprints. Large ones. Deeply pressed into the dirt. I did not follow them far. I did not need to. I went back to the car, got in, and started the engine. The sound felt loud and comforting. As I drove away, I did not feel relief right away. It came slowly, mile by mile, as the trees thinned and the road improved and my phone got signal again. I did not report it. I did not tell anyone in detail. I just said the trip did not go well. The clear ending for me came later, after I had time to think. After the fear settled into something quieter and heavier. I understood that being alone in places like that does not mean being alone. It means being unprotected. It means stepping into spaces where other people can move unseen, unheard, without rules or witnesses. I stopped camping alone after that. I still think about that night sometimes. Not with panic anymore, but with a clear understanding of what happened. Someone was there. They watched. They circled. They touched the tent. And they left without being seen. That is what scares me the most. Not what could have happened, but how easily it almost did. I went camping alone in late autumn, the kind of time when the days are still warm enough to be outside but the nights drop fast and hard. I picked a remote public land area far from towns, far from paved roads, and far from cell service. I wanted quiet. I wanted to feel small in a big place. I told myself it was safe because I had camped many times before, because I had maps, because I had enough food and water, and because I planned everything carefully. That confidence followed me for the first part of the trip, riding with me as the road turned from asphalt to gravel, and then from gravel to too-thin tire tracks cutting through dry grass and low scrub. The land was wide and mostly flat, with shallow hills that looked closer than they really were. The sky was clean and pale blue, the kind of sky that makes sound travel far. I parked my truck near a cluster of weathered trees and shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, like pressure in my ears. Wind brushed the grass in slow waves. I could smell dust and dry leaves. There were no signs of recent campers. No fire rings that looked fresh. No tire tracks newer than my own. That made me feel good at first, like I had found a secret spot. I set up my tent slowly, taking my time. I placed it where the ground was flat and slightly raised so water would not pool if it rained. I staked it down carefully and checked each corner twice. I set my pack inside, laid out my sleeping bag, and organized my gear the way I always did. Familiar habits helped me relax. I cooked a simple meal while the sun dropped lower, watching the light change color across the land. Shadows stretched long and thin. The temperature started to fall, and I pulled on a heavier jacket. As the sun touched the horizon, I noticed how empty everything felt. Not empty in a peaceful way, but empty like something missing. The wind died down, and the quiet became deeper. I could hear my own movements too clearly. The scrape of my boot on a rock sounded loud. The zipper on my jacket sounded sharp. I told myself this was normal, that my senses were just adjusting. Night came fast. The sky turned dark blue and then black, filling with stars so thick it looked unreal. I sat near my tent and ate a second small meal, listening. Somewhere far away, an animal moved through the grass. The sound was light and cautious. I did not worry about animals much. I worried more about people, even though I rarely saw anyone in places like this. When it got fully dark, I cleaned up, packed away my food, and went into my tent. I zipped it closed and lay on my back, staring at the fabric above me. The air inside the tent was cold. I could see my breath. I shifted in my sleeping bag until I was warm enough to rest. Outside, the land made small sounds. Grass rubbing together, something stepping on dry leaves, wind returning in soft bursts. I slept in pieces, waking often for no clear reason. Each time I woke, I listened. The sounds never seemed close enough to worry me, but they never stopped either. At some point deep in the night, I heard something different. A heavy sound, not loud but solid, like a foot pressing into the ground with weight behind it. It happened once, then again, slow and careful. I stayed still. I did not move my hands. I did not shift my legs. I counted my breaths and tried to place the sound in my mind. It was not an animal moving fast or clumsy. It was measured. The sound came from the direction of my truck. I waited for it to stop. It did not. It moved, paused, then moved again. I told myself it could be another camper who arrived late. That thought did not help much. There had been no headlights, no engine sound. I lay there until the sound faded, then faded more, until the night returned to its earlier rhythm. I did not sleep much after that. Morning came cold and gray. A thin layer of frost covered the ground. I stepped out of my tent and breathed in the sharp air. Everything looked normal at first. My truck was where I left it. My gear was untouched. I walked around the camp, scanning the ground. Near the edge of the clearing, I saw footprints. Human footprints. They were not mine. The prints were fresh, clear in the frost. They circled the camp at a distance, not close enough to trip over anything, but close enough to see. They led toward my truck, then away again. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the grass. My stomach tightened. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the ground like it might explain itself. I packed up quickly. I told myself the smart thing was to leave, but another part of me resisted. I had driven far to get here. I hated the idea of being scared away. I compromised by deciding to move camp later in the day, after daylight gave me some confidence. I ate, drank water, and tried to shake the tension from my body. As the sun climbed, the frost melted, taking some of the sharpness from the ground. The footprints became less clear, but I still knew they were there. I spent the morning hiking short loops around the area, never going far, always keeping my camp in sight. I wanted to understand the land better, to see if there were roads or paths nearby. I found an old dirt track about half a mile away, almost hidden by grass. It looked rarely used, but it existed. That bothered me more than it should have. I returned to camp and decided to pack up and move closer to my truck, ready to leave if needed. As I worked, I noticed something else. One of my water bottles was not where I remembered putting it. I searched my pack, my tent, the ground around me. I found it eventually, but it was sitting upright near a tree, farther from camp than I would have placed it. I stood there, holding the bottle, feeling a cold line run through my chest. I did not stay another night. I loaded my gear into the truck and drove out, keeping my eyes on the mirrors. The land looked the same as before, wide and quiet, but I did not feel small in a good way anymore. I felt watched. When I reached the paved road, I did not stop until I was well away from that place. I still think about those footprints. I still think about how careful they were, how they kept a distance, how they came in the night when I could not see. Nothing happened to me. I left under my own power, but I learned something clear and simple. Being alone in a remote place does not make you invisible. Sometimes it makes you easier to find. I picked the campground because no one ever talked about it. It sat far from the main road, deep inside a stretch of forest that did not show up clearly on most maps. The kind of place that only existed as a faded name on an old park brochure. I wanted quiet. I wanted distance from people. I wanted to camp somewhere that felt empty. The drive alone took most of the day. The paved road turned into cracked asphalt, then gravel, then a dirt path with deep ruts and sharp stones. Trees leaned in closer the farther I went, their branches forming a loose tunnel over the road. There were no houses, no cell signal, no signs of recent traffic. The farther I drove, the more I felt like I was slowly slipping away from the normal world. By the time I reached the campground, the sun was already low. The light looked thin and weak, filtered through tall pine trees that blocked most of the sky. The campground itself was small, only 6 campsites, arranged in a loose circle around a dry fire pit. A rusted metal sign leaned at an angle near the entrance, the letters barely readable. There were no other cars, no tents, no sounds of people. I parked near the farthest site from the entrance. It felt better to be away from the road, even if the road barely counted as one. I shut off the engine, and the silence hit immediately. No wind. No birds, just the quiet hum of my ears adjusting. I unloaded my gear slowly. Tent, sleeping bag, food box, lantern, water. Everything felt louder than it should have. The scrape of boots on dirt, the snap of tent poles, the zip of fabric. Each sound carried farther than expected. I kept stopping without realizing it, listening, waiting for something else to move or respond. Nothing ever did. The ground was hard and cold. Winter had already set in, though there was no snow yet. The air smelled sharp and dry. I set up the tent facing away from the tree line, leaving open space in front of me. I told myself it was for the view, but it was really so I could see if anything came close. As daylight faded, the forest changed. Shadows stretched between the trees and pooled in places that had been clearly visible just minutes earlier. The temperature dropped fast. My breath became visible. I turned on my lantern and placed it near the tent entrance. The circle of light it created felt small, fragile, like it could be swallowed at any moment. I cooked a simple meal and ate standing up, not wanting to sit or relax too much. I kept scanning the edges of the campground, counting trees, memorizing shapes. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Empty. That was when I noticed the footprints. They were near the fire pit, half pressed into the dirt. Not fresh, but not old either. Boot prints, large, uneven. They did not follow a straight path. They circled the pit, then disappeared into the trees on the opposite side of where I was camped. At first, I told myself they could be from a ranger or a hunter, someone passing through earlier in the day. But the campground showed no other signs of recent use. No tire tracks, no trash, no fire ash that looked new. I crouched down and looked closer. The prints overlapped each other in places, like someone had been pacing, walking back and forth, standing still for long periods of time. I stood up slowly and looked toward the trees where the prints vanished. The darkness there felt thicker than the rest of the forest, like the light from my lantern refused to enter it. I went back to my campsite and checked my gear again. Everything was where I left it, nothing disturbed. I locked the food box, even though animals were not my main concern anymore. Night fell fully. The forest became a solid wall of black beyond the reach of the lantern. I climbed into my tent early, telling myself rest would help. The sleeping bag was cold at first, then slowly warmed. I lay on my back, staring at the tent ceiling, listening. First, there was nothing. Then came the sound of movement. It was not loud, not sudden, just a soft crunch like a foot pressing carefully into dirt. Then another, slow, controlled, too steady to be an animal. Whatever it was moving around the campground, staying just outside the light. I held my breath without realizing it. The sound stopped. Minutes passed. My heart pounded so hard I worried it could be heard. I strained to listen past it. Then the movement started again, closer this time. The crunch of leaves, the faint snap of a twig. It circled wide at first, then tighter. I did not hear breathing. I did not hear speech, just footsteps. They stopped directly behind my tent. The fabric did not move. No shadow crossed the lantern light. Whoever was there stood still, waiting. I stayed frozen, every muscle locked. I did not reach for my flashlight. I did not unzip the tent. I did not make a sound. After what felt like hours, the footsteps slowly backed away. They did not rush. They did not run. They simply faded into the forest. I did not sleep at all that night. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet, not because I was brave. I had been working nonstop for months, barely sleeping, barely thinking straight, and I felt like my head was always buzzing. I needed to shut everything off. No phone service, no people, just trees, dirt, water, and time passing slowly. That was the idea I kept telling myself while I loaded my car with gear I hadn't used in years. I chose a public forest far from the main roads, a place that barely showed up on maps unless you zoomed in. It wasn't some secret spot, but it was far enough that most people didn't bother. The drive there took almost 5 hours, and the last hour was on a narrow dirt road that twisted through thick woods. The trees were close to the road, their branches leaning in like they were trying to touch the car. I remember noticing how quiet it already felt even with the engine running. When I finally parked, there were no other cars. That didn't worry me at first. It was a weekday, and the weather forecast said it might rain later in the week. Most people probably stayed home. I locked the car, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started walking toward the campsite markers I had looked up online. The air smelled damp and earthy, like wet leaves and old wood. The ground was soft under my boots, and every step made a quiet crunch. The campsite itself was simple. A flat patch of dirt surrounded by tall trees, a rusted fire ring, and a wooden picnic table that leaned slightly to one side. No trash, no footprints that I could see. It looked unused, which I took as a good sign. I set my pack down and stood still for a moment, listening. No voices, no engines, just wind moving through leaves and a bird somewhere far off. Setting up camp took longer than I expected. My hands felt clumsy, and I kept having to redo things. The tent poles didn't want to lock properly, and one of the stakes bent when I pushed it into the ground. I fixed it and kept going. By the time the tent was up, my shirt was damp with sweat even though the air was cool. I told myself I was just out of practice. Once everything was set, I walked around the area to get familiar with it. I followed a narrow trail that led toward a creek I could hear in the distance. The water was shallow and clear, moving slowly over smooth stones. I filled my bottles and stood there longer than I needed to, watching the current move. It was calming in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. As the sun started to lower, the light in the forest changed. The shadows stretched out, and the space between trees looked darker than it had earlier. I went back to camp and started a small fire. The wood crackled softly, and the smell of smoke mixed with the forest air. I cooked a simple meal and ate slowly, sitting on the edge of the picnic table. That was when I noticed the first thing that felt off. There was a sound that didn't match the rest of the forest. Not loud, not sudden, just wrong. It was the faint snap of a branch, somewhere behind the trees to my left. At first, I thought it was an animal. Squirrels, deer, anything like that. I waited, listening for more movement. Nothing came. The forest settled back into its usual quiet. I told myself I was imagining things. Being alone makes you notice sounds you would normally ignore. I cleaned up my food, hung it from a tree like I was supposed to, and put out the fire. The sky was darkening fast now, and the temperature dropped enough that I put on a jacket. Inside the tent, everything felt smaller. The fabric walls moved slightly with the breeze, making soft rustling noises. I laid on my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, listening to the night settle in. Crickets started up. Somewhere far away, an owl called once and then went quiet. I don't know how long I lay there before I realized I was still wide awake. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't slow down. Every small sound felt louder inside the tent. Leaves brushing against the fabric. Something moving on the ground nearby. I kept telling myself it was normal. This was what camping sounded like. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow and uneven, not like an animal moving on four legs. They stopped, then started again, closer this time. I held my breath without meaning to. The steps moved around the edge of my campsite, staying just outside the reach of my headlamp beam when I clicked it on. I didn't see anything, but the feeling that someone was there didn't go away. After a while, the footsteps faded into the distance. I stayed awake long after, afraid that if I moved, the sound would come back. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The forest was completely silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. That silence felt heavier than any noise. I lay still, listening, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I heard breathing, not mine. It was outside the tent, close enough that I could hear the slow pull of air. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The breathing stayed there for what felt like forever, then slowly moved away. I waited until my muscles started to ache from staying still. When I finally dared to move, the silence returned, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, the light felt like relief. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, blinking in the early sun. The campsite looked normal, too normal. But when I walked around, I saw footprints in the dirt near the fire ring. Boot prints, not mine. They circled the tent. That was when I knew I wasn't imagining things. I packed up some of my gear, telling myself I would leave later that day. I wanted daylight. I wanted to be able to see everything clearly. But before I finished packing, I noticed something else. The rope I had used to hang my food was gone. The bag wasn't torn or dropped. It was just gone. Someone had taken it. The realization settled deep in my chest, heavy and cold. I was not alone out there, and whoever it was had no problem moving around my camp while I slept. I decided to leave immediately. As I started packing faster, I heard movement again, closer than before, coming from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. I didn't look. I just kept packing, hands shaking, heart racing. Then I felt it, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I grabbed my keys, my pack, and started walking fast toward the trail back to the car, every sense on high alert. That was when I realized the trail looked different. Branches had been dragged across it. The ground was disturbed, like someone had tried to hide the path. My stomach dropped. I stopped walking, scanning the trees, finally turning around slowly. That was when I saw him, a man standing between the trees, far enough away that I couldn't see his face clearly, but close enough to know he was watching me. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there. My body reacted before my mind did. I ran. I ran harder than I ever had, crashing through brush, ignoring the pain in my legs, my lungs burning. I didn't follow the trail anymore. I just ran downhill, knowing water usually led to roads. Branches scraped my arms and face. I fell once, hard, and got back up without thinking. Behind me, I heard movement, faster now. I didn't look back. I reached the creek, followed it blindly, slipping on wet stones, heart pounding so loud it felt like it might burst. After what felt like hours, I saw it. The dirt road. I stumbled onto it, half running, half falling, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I unlocked it, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. I drove away without stopping, tires kicking up dust, not slowing down until the forest thinned and the road turned to pavement. I didn't report it. I didn't go back. Weeks later, I still wake up some nights thinking I hear breathing outside my window. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't go places where no one can hear me scream, because something followed me out there. Not a ghost, not a monster, just a man who knew how quiet the woods could be. I went camping alone because I needed silence. Not the peaceful kind that people talk about, but the heavy kind that presses against your ears and makes you aware of every small sound your own body makes. I picked a remote forest area that was far from marked campsites. No bathrooms, no fire rings, no signs. Just old forest roads that barely showed up on my GPS and a long walk in through trees that looked like they had been standing there long before anyone thought of naming them. The drive itself already felt wrong. The farther I went, the worse the road became. Asphalt turned into cracked pavement, then gravel, then dirt. The trees closed in tighter on both sides, and my phone signal disappeared without warning. I remember checking the time and realizing how late in the day it was getting. The sun was already dropping lower, and the light coming through the trees had that yellow-orange color that only lasts for a short time before everything turns dark fast. I parked my car in a wide patch of dirt that looked like it had been used before, maybe by hunters or loggers years ago. There were old tire tracks hardened into the ground and weeds growing through them. No fresh footprints, no trash, no signs of recent activity. That should have made me feel better, but instead it made the place feel abandoned in a way that didn't feel natural. I loaded my pack and started walking. The forest floor was uneven, covered in dead leaves, broken branches, and patches of soft soil that gave slightly under my boots. Every step made noise. Even when I tried to walk slowly, the sound of crunching leaves and snapping twigs followed me like it was being recorded and played back a second later. The deeper I went, the thicker the trees became. Tall pines mixed with older hardwoods, their trunks dark and scarred. Some trees leaned at strange angles, like they had been pushed but never fully knocked down. The air smelled damp and old, not rotten but used, like a place that had seen too much time pass through it. I chose a spot near a shallow creek. The water was moving slowly, just enough to make a quiet, constant sound. I figured it would help cover the noise I made at night. The ground nearby was flat enough to set up a tent, and there were no obvious animal trails cutting through the area. I checked for tracks and didn't see anything clear, just old impressions filled in by dirt and leaves. Setting up camp took longer than usual. My hands felt clumsy, like I was rushing even though I wasn't. I kept stopping to look around, scanning the tree line without really knowing what I was looking for. The forest was still. No birds, no insects, just the sound of the creek and my own breathing. By the time the tent was up, the light was fading fast. The shadows stretched longer between the trees, and the colors around me dulled into shades of gray and dark green. I started a small fire, careful to keep it controlled. The flames flickered and cast moving shadows that danced across the trunks, making the forest look like it was shifting even though nothing was actually moving. I ate slowly, sitting on a fallen log. Every bite sounded too loud. The crackle of the fire felt sharp against the quiet. I kept feeling like if I stopped making noise completely, something else would fill the silence. That thought stayed with me, sitting heavy in my chest. As night fully settled in, the temperature dropped. The air became colder and heavier. The smell of smoke clung to my clothes and hair. I put out the fire earlier than I wanted to, not because I was tired, but because I didn't like how far the light carried into the trees. It felt like I was announcing exactly where I was. Inside the tent, everything felt smaller. The thin fabric walls did nothing to block out sound. Every shift of my weight made the material rustle. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening. First, it was just the creak. Then the wind moved through the branches high above, making a low, uneven sound. Somewhere far off, something heavy moved through the undergrowth. Not fast, not panicked, slow and steady, like it knew where it was going. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, something normal. But the sound didn't fade the way animal movement usually does. Stopped, started again, then stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Time stretched. I checked my watch again and again, surprised by how little time had passed. My body felt tense, every muscle tight. I listened so hard that my ears started to ring. Then I heard footsteps. They were distant at first, barely more than a soft compression of leaves. Too slow to be a small animal, too measured to be something running. Each step was placed carefully with a pause between them. The sound came from the direction of the creek, then shifted slightly, as if whatever it was had changed course. I held my breath without realizing it. The footsteps stopped again. The forest went completely quiet, like everything else was waiting. After what felt like a long time, the steps resumed, closer now. Still slow, still careful. No stumbling, no random movement, just deliberate steps through the leaves. I stayed completely still inside the tent. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept expecting the sound to rush closer, but it didn't. It circled instead. Wide at first, then tighter. Leaves crunched closer to my tent. A shadow passed briefly across the thin fabric, blocking out the faint starlight for just a second before moving on. Whatever it was didn't touch the tent. It didn't sniff. It didn't make any sudden movements. It just walked. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under, even though my body stayed tense. When I woke up, it was still dark, and the forest was quiet again. Morning came slowly. Gray light filtered through the trees, revealing a forest that looked normal again, almost harmless. I stepped out of the tent carefully, scanning the ground around me. Footprints were pressed into the soft soil around my camp. They were human. They circled the tent once. Not frantic, not rushed, just one full loop. Then they turned back toward the trees and disappeared into the forest. I packed up immediately. No breakfast, no fire. My hands shook as I stuffed everything into my pack. I kept looking up, expecting to see someone watching from between the trees, but the forest stayed empty. The walk back felt longer than the way in. Every sound made me flinch. When I finally reached my car and saw it untouched, relief washed over me so hard it almost made me dizzy. I drove away without stopping, not slowing down until the road turned back into pavement and my phone regained signal. I never reported it. I never went back. What stayed with me wasn't the fear of being attacked. It was the calm, deliberate way those footprints circled my tent, like someone had all the time in the world and knew I couldn't go anywhere. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet. That was the main reason. I had been around people too much, listening to noise all day, phones buzzing, cars passing, voices talking over each other. I wanted a place where nothing was happening unless I made it happen. I picked a spot deep inside a national forest, far from main roads, far from campgrounds with bathrooms and picnic tables. I chose a place that wasn't marked on any official camping map, just an open clearing I found while studying satellite images and old hiking forums. The drive there took most of the day. The paved road slowly turned into cracked asphalt, then into gravel, then into dirt. Trees closed in tighter the farther I went. The sunlight filtered through the leaves in thin stripes that moved across the hood of my car. I kept the windows down, smelling pine, damp soil, and something metallic from the engine heat. There was no cell service for a long time, but I didn't care. I actually felt relief when the signal dropped to nothing. I parked near a fallen log that blocked the old forest road. I knew from the start that I wouldn't see anyone else out there. No tire tracks, no footprints, no trash. Just trees, rocks, and silence. When I shut off the engine, the quiet felt heavy, like pressure on my ears. I sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Somewhere far away, a bird called once and then stopped. I unloaded my gear slowly. Tent, backpack, food, water, sleeping bag, small stove. I checked everything twice, not because I was nervous, but because I had learned the hard way that forgetting one small thing could ruin a trip. The forest floor was uneven, covered with needles and dry leaves. My boots sank slightly with each step. The air was cool but not cold, and there was a steady smell of damp wood everywhere. I set up my tent in the clearing, making sure the ground was flat enough. It took longer than usual because I kept stopping to look around. The trees were tall and close together, their trunks dark and straight. There were no clear trails leading into the clearing, just faint animal paths that disappeared into brush. I told myself that meant privacy. At the time, that felt like a good thing. As the sun lowered, the light changed fast. The forest went from bright green to dark gold, then to gray. Shadows stretched longer between the trees. I cooked a simple meal and ate it sitting on a rock, listening to insects start up for the night. The sounds felt normal. Crickets, distant rustling, leaves shifting in the breeze. Nothing out of place. Still, there was a feeling I couldn't fully explain. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. The kind you get when you know you're very far from help, and everything that happens next depends on you. When night came, it came fully. No city glow, no distant lights, just darkness layered between the trees. I turned off my headlamp for a moment just to see what true darkness looked like. I couldn't see my hands. I turned the light back on immediately and zipped myself into the tent. I lay there listening to the forest breathe. Wind moving branches, small animals moving through leaves, the ground cooling. Time passed slowly. I wasn't tired yet, so I stared at the tent ceiling, watching shadows move when the wind picked up. Sometime later, I noticed something different. The normal night sounds didn't stop, but they shifted. The rhythm changed. Crickets became uneven. The rustling moved closer, then farther away, then closer again. It felt patterned, but I couldn't tell why. I told myself it was probably a deer or something small passing through. That made sense. That's what forests are for. Then I heard footsteps. Not loud, not heavy, just slow pressure on leaves and dirt. One step at a time, careful steps. I stayed still. My breathing became shallow without me trying. The sound stopped just outside the clearing. I waited. Nothing happened for a long time. No more steps. No animal noises moving away. Just silence where something should have been. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing. I forced my body to relax. I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet and space and time away from everything. I picked a random spot on public land far from marked campsites. It was late fall, the kind of time when the days feel short and the air smells like dead leaves and cold dirt. I parked my truck on the side of a rough forest road and hiked in with my pack. The forest was thick with pine and spruce, and the ground was soft with needles and damp soil. I could hear wind moving through the trees and the distant sound of a creek somewhere downhill. I chose a small flat area near the creek, but not too close. I knew enough to avoid flooding and cold air settling in low spots. I set up my tent slowly, making sure everything was tight and low to the ground. The sky was already turning gray and heavy, and I felt that familiar mix of calm and tension that always comes when night is coming in the woods. I collected firewood, snapping dead branches and stacking them neatly. My hands smelled like sap and wet bark. I made a small fire ring with stones and got a fire going. The flames were weak at first, then steadier, and the light made the trees around me look closer than they really were. I cooked a simple meal and ate it slowly. The forest got quieter as the light faded. Birds stopped moving. The wind died down. The quiet felt deep, like the woods were holding their breath. I packed away my food carefully and hung it from a tree, more out of habit than fear. I checked my gear and made sure my headlamp worked. I remember thinking that everything felt normal and fine. As it got fully dark, I sat by the fire and listened. I heard the creek, steady and calm. I heard small animals moving through leaves. Nothing felt wrong at first. I crawled into my tent early because the cold was settling in. I zipped the tent closed and lay on my sleeping pad, listening to the forest through the thin fabric. The fire outside slowly burned down. The light faded. The darkness felt thicker. Sometime later, I woke up without knowing why. My body felt tense before my mind caught up. I lay still and listened. At first, I thought it was just the creek and the wind, but then I heard something else. It was faint and far away, but it was not an animal sound. It was the sound of footsteps on dry leaves, slow and careful. Then they stopped. I held my breath without meaning to. I waited. The sound did not come again right away. I told myself it could be a deer or another animal, but the way the steps stopped felt wrong. Animals usually keep moving. My heart started beating harder. I stayed still, listening through the tent wall. After a long moment, the steps came back, closer this time. Still slow, still careful. I could hear leaves crunching and small sticks snapping. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be moving around the edge of my campsite. The sound circled, then stopped again. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The cold felt sharper. I did not move. I did not unzip the tent. I stayed frozen, hoping the sound would go away. After what felt like a very long time, the steps moved off, heading downhill toward the creek. I waited even longer after the sound faded, afraid to relax too soon. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back into a shallow sleep. I woke up again before dawn. The sky was still dark, but I could tell morning was coming. The forest felt different, like it always does before sunrise. I lay there, listening carefully. Everything was quiet. No footsteps, no strange sounds. I told myself it was probably just an animal and that my fear had filled in the gaps. Still, I did not feel fully calm. When the light finally started to creep in, I got out of my tent. The cold air hit my face and hands. I stretched and looked around. At first glance, everything looked the same. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The fire ring had been disturbed. Some of the stones were moved, and the ashes were spread out, as if someone had stepped in them. I walked slowly around the campsite, looking at the ground. There were footprints in the soft dirt and ash. They were not animal tracks. They were boot prints, adult size, more than one set. They circled my tent. I felt a deep chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I stood there for a long moment, listening and scanning the trees. The forest was quiet, but now the quiet felt heavy and watchful. I packed up faster than I normally would. My hands shook as I rolled up my sleeping bag and shoved it into my pack. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone step out from behind a tree. I decided not to leave right away. Part of me thought it might be safer to wait until full daylight. Another part of me felt like staying was a mistake. I compromised by making breakfast quickly and quietly. I did not start a fire. I ate cold food and drank water, my eyes never stopping their slow sweep of the area. Once the sun was fully up, I broke camp and started hiking back toward my truck. I chose a slightly different route, staying on higher ground. The forest felt normal again in some ways. Birds were active. The light made the trees look less threatening. Still, I felt like I was being watched. Every sound made me tense. About an hour into the hike, I found something else that confirmed my fear had not been nothing. I came across a makeshift camp hidden off the trail. It was crude and messy. There was trash scattered around, empty food cans and old clothing. The ground was trampled. It looked like people had been staying there for a while. I did not see anyone, but the place felt recently used. I moved past it quickly, my pace faster now. I wanted to get out of the area. The farther I walked, the more I noticed signs that people had been around. Broken branches, disturbed ground, boot prints crossing the faint trail I was following. This was not the empty wilderness I thought I had come to. By the time I reached my truck, my nerves were shot. I loaded my pack and sat in the driver's seat for a while, just breathing. I told myself that leaving was the right choice. I drove down the forest road and onto the highway, watching the trees thin out as civilization crept back in. I decided to camp at a more established campground that night, one with other people around. I told myself it was just for one night before heading home. I checked in, set up my tent near other campsites, and tried to relax. The presence of other campers made me feel safer, even if I did not interact with them. That night, I slept better, but not deeply. I woke up a few times, listening, my body still on edge. In the morning, I packed up and started the drive home. I thought the experience was over. I was wrong. A few miles down the highway, I noticed a truck behind me that seemed to be following too closely. First, I brushed it off. Plenty of people drive the same roads. But every time I changed lanes or slowed down, the truck stayed right behind me. My chest tightened. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I kept driving, staying calm. Eventually, I turned off onto a smaller road that led toward a town. The truck followed. I took another turn, followed again. The feeling in my gut grew heavier. I did not speed. I did not stop. I drove steadily toward a busy area where there would be more people. As I got closer to town, the truck finally slowed and turned off onto a different road. I did not see it again. I reached home later that day, exhausted and shaken. For a while, I tried to convince myself that I was connecting things that were not related. Footprints at my camp, a hidden campsite, a truck on the road. But the fear stuck with me. Over the next few days, I replayed everything in my head. The careful footsteps in the night, the way they circled my tent, the disturbed fire ring, the hidden camp. None of it felt random anymore. It felt like I had stumbled into an area being used by people who did not want to be seen. Weeks later, I saw a news article about illegal activity on public land in that region. It mentioned people living off-grid in hidden camps, involved in theft and other crimes. The article talked about hikers and campers feeling threatened, about campsites being watched. Reading it made my skin prickle. It matched too closely. The fear slowly faded, but it never fully went away. I still camp, but I am more careful now. I choose locations differently. I trust my instincts more. That trip taught me something important about the woods. The danger is not always something unreal or imagined. Sometimes it is just other people, unseen and close, moving quietly in the dark. The ending of that trip stayed clear in my mind. I left when I could. I did not wait for proof beyond what I already had. I got home safely. Nothing happened to me physically, but the experience changed how I see solitude in the wild. It reminded me that being alone does not always mean being alone, and that realism, not fantasy, is often what makes something truly scary.